Breaking news here on CBS Sports HQ. The college basketball world is mourning the loss of legendary head coach Bobby Knight, who died today at the age of 83 years old. He died at his home in Bloomington, Indiana. Knight won 902 games with stops at Army, Indiana, and Texas Tech. It was with the Hoosiers that he won 3 NCAA men's championships, including coaching the sport's most recent undefeated team in 1976. You know, he combined a demanding will and a legendary temper to become one of the most fiercest voices in sports. Bobby Knight was 83 years old. He retired in 2008 with a then Division I record 902 career wins, 6th all-time. Again, he won 3 national titles at Indiana, and he had an incredible team in 1976 that went undefeated. The Hall of Famer, again, passing away at the age of 83. And for perspective, welcome in former college basketball coach and CBS Sports analyst Chris Walker and CBS Sports senior writer Matt Norlander. Chris, when you think of Bob Knight, what comes to mind? Because he had a complicated coaching career, but he was a winner and he was a legend in college basketball.
He certainly was a very successful coach, a throwback coach, one of which the likes will probably never see again, a 42-year career and 3 national championships, and he done it at every level. I had the pleasure of working for Steve Alford at New Mexico, so I heard a ton of Coach Knight stories and references as well. And again, one of the smartest coaches. I had a chance to also play against, not necessarily play, but coach against Coach Knight in the NCAA tournament. Again, just a winner at every level, tough. He had the greatest saying of all, and he used to say, dumb will get you beat, better than smart will help you win. And that is something I internalized, and I talk to coaches today, is that you need to have smart players, cerebral players. That's what the motion offense is all about. And again, at Texas Tech, where I was a head coach, followed him. He made that job a sexy job, and you see the winning they're doing today. But, you know, that started when Coach Knight went there. But again, he will be missed. Obviously spawned one of the greatest coaches of all time in Mike Krzyzewski, and one of my favorite players of all time in Isaiah Thomas. You know, just a sad day in college basketball. College basketball is right around the corner on Monday, so sad news ahead of some great news that we're getting ready to start the season.
Certainly helped instill some toughness in both of those men, Isaiah Thomas and Mike Krzyzewski. And Matt, when you think about how Bobby Knight was with fans and the media, what do you think of the way he spoke to the media? He was tough. He was no nonsense.
He was confrontational. He was often condescending, certainly memorable. Bob Knight carries an immense legacy that is draped with controversy as much acclaim as there is. I mean, when he retired, he was the all-time leader in men's Division I victories. Also note that Bob Knight's basketball career began at Ohio State as a player, where he won a national championship in 1960 as a role player alongside the likes of future Hall of Famers John Lucas and Havlicek. And what's a bit ironic about all this is that Knight, and it kind of ups his coaching resume overall. Isaiah Thomas, obviously a very great player, and he had Quinn Buckner and he had Scott May, and there were really great ones. But he, over the course of his career, it's not like Indiana was bringing in, you know, future NBA All-Star one after the other after the other. Of course, he coached Mike Krzyzewski at Army, and as influential as almost any coach, some coaches would say Bob Knight's motion offense and the tactics he brought to, there weren't whiteboards so much then, to the chalkboard, were more transcendent than maybe almost any coach out there. Those schemes used plenty in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. But he is someone who was a bully and is someone who was fired from Indiana, and that caused an absolute uproar when that happened in 2000, with multiple protests after he was kicked out of that program following 3 decades of legendary coaching work. But it really was the mold of how Bob Knight opted to coach that established his legend, but also served as a precursor for how we don't have coaches like Bob Knight in major American sports anymore, and there are very valid reasons for that. He was a man of his time, and that did increase the legend around him. It helped him help him get the gig to coach the 1984 gold medal winning team with Michael Jordan. And Bob Knight had a tremendous eye for scouting talent. It was Bob Knight in 1984 who identified Michael Jordan as one of the greatest basketball talents, I think actually the greatest basketball talent he had ever seen. And this is Jordan before he had played with the Chicago Bulls. So he's known for throwing the chair across the floor. He's known for a couple of, curse-laden tirades against players, against the media. But within college basketball and within the coaching ranks, he is still regarded among the all-time greats for the way he chose to do it and how he got success year after year, decade after decade.
Yeah, Chris, his approach would certainly not work nowadays. It worked back then. It worked back then, but as Matt alluded to, he was a product of the era.
He was, and I'll echo Matt's point about in today's world, particularly college sports, it would be a no-no. You're talking about emotional intelligence. You're talking about mental health. You're talking about, a situation where back then, any of us, our relatives or our parents, they walked up the hill in snow to get to work for 7 hours every day. It's just a different mindset, different world, and certainly things that are just intolerable today. I don't want to tarnish his day as he passes. And talk about some of the things that were, that weren't so flattering about him. Because, again, that's not something that I subscribe to. But, again, to talk about him in totality, you can't talk about his legacy and the measure of how he won without talking about the other stuff. That's a little bit sticky. But, again, like I said, he coached, and Matt was right, he coached players. He had an eye for talent. He knew Jordan before Jordan. Obviously, Dean Smith probably knew before him, but he was the one that put that stamp on him. And they won and made Bloomington, and I don't know if Matt would disagree, he's more of the college basketball authoritarian of making Indiana a blue blood during that time, where Indiana was the it school in the Midwest or the Big Ten or in the country. But again, a great coach, Hall of Famer, and really set the tone. Motion offense today is still one of the most complicated ways to play offense because it requires thinking. It requires players to be in sync. It requires players to be unselfish and screen for each other, something in the me first era that we see right now in basketball that will be foreign to players today. So he was certainly, I wouldn't say ahead of his time, but he created the narrative, as I said before, where smart players, no matter how talented you are, from the neck up, you have to be a smart player if you want to be a great player, and that's why his teams were so successful.
Yeah, I'll also note that Bob Knight, because he was fired at Indiana in 2000, he held a grudge, which was his style, for many, many years. But in recent years, he moved back to Bloomington, and as his health began to wane near the end of his life, he still made time to help mend those fences. He was honored. He went back to the university a few years ago and was honored in the middle of a game at halftime with so many of his former players there. And then in particular, I spoke with a source earlier on Wednesday who informed me that Bob Knight, on an almost weekly basis this past season, 2022-2023 season, when one of his former players, Mike Whitson, who's now been running the program, he made the time to get over and try and watch Indiana practice almost every single week. And so while that was not ultra publicized, people in that community, I know it meant a lot to them, because for a long time, Knight disassociated themselves with the university because of the way that he was cut loose in 2000. He, of course, then went on to Texas Tech and helped give that program some real life in the final stages of his legendary and Hall of Fame coaching career. But there's no doubt about it, Bob Knight leaves a towering but complicated and, yes, controversial legacy within the sport. What he was able to do between the lines is still felt today and will be remembered for decades to come.
Yeah, it was nice to see him being honored at Indiana when they celebrated him, brought back his former players, sort of like an olive branch. And it was more, as you said, Matt, him making this stance against the university, but coming together and saying, okay, we can mend this broken fence. And fortunately, they were able to do before his passing. When you think of Bobby Knight, and a lot of fans who watch college basketball, they think of this yelling guy, this fierce guy, maybe some not so kind words to describe him of how he was as a college basketball coach. He was also endearing, right? He said things that were funny, that were controversial, but like a quote that we looked up and we look up quotes from these people's lives when they pass away, and you think, okay, how do they want to be remembered? And here's a quote that he said himself: "When my time on earth is gone and my activities here are past, I want them to bury me upside down and my critics can kiss my you-know-what." And I know people have used that quote before, but that's sort of kind of who he was as a person, Chris. This was a guy, if you don't like me, I don't care, you can you-know-what.
You know what? You know, when people are in the thick of things, and I've coached for 20 plus years, and I'm sure there's a lot of things that I may have said to a player or said to another coach or something that I would love to take back or say, you know what, I probably shouldn't have said that. I could have handled that differently. And every coach, when they look in the mirror, the question is, can you stomach the person that's looking back at you? Because at the end of the day, it's about how you treat people and that legacy that you want to leave behind. I love to get every job that I got because I'm the smartest guy in the room, but it's more gratifying to get the job because you're the best person in the room, attitude-wise. Again, not to cast any aspersions on Bobby Knight and his behavior. You know, it's just one of those things where he was fearless. It was him against the world, and that's the way he chose to do it. And again, I'm sure, you know, neither one of us has talked to him intimately, but I'm sure people around him can tell you what kind of guy is this. Certainly a guy like Steve Alford, who loved him to death, who had the pleasure of working for, had nothing but graceful stories, but he had stories that made him become a man. And let's forget, Larry Bird tried to go to Indiana, and he left and went to Indiana State. So again, there's an element of toughness there that, hey, that even today's kids, they need that element of toughness in the era of the transfer portal and people leaving at the first sign of quote unquote perceived danger or things not going their way. But at the end of the day, again, a very successful program, a lot of successful people, just again, a colorful past that kind of at the end of the day casts a shadow of it, of what he accomplished. But today we should celebrate him.
Indeed. A complicated, polarizing figure, but you said it well right there, Chris Walker, a man who should be celebrated, a college basketball titan in the history of this great game. Chris Walker, Matt Norlander here on CBS Sports HQ, providing perspective as Bob Knight passes away at the age of 83 years old. Men, thank you. And the Knight family announcing in a statement on Wednesday, quote, "It is with heavy hearts that we share that Coach Bob Knight passed away at his home in Bloomington, surrounded by his family. We are grateful for all the thoughts and prayers and appreciate the continued respect for our privacy as Coach requested a private family gathering, which is being honored. We will continue to celebrate his life and remember him today and forever as a beloved husband, father, coach, and friend." Hall of Fame college basketball coach Bob Knight passed away at the age of 83.